Welcome to the Stems of Grad School podcast. Today we have Nicholas Volpe and Lauren Mattina, who are the host of the Just NAS Science podcast. And I'm really excited to have you guys today.
Oh, we're excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah. So do you want to just kind of start off by sharing a little bit about what your current positions are and kind of the high points of how you got to those positions?
Sure. Lauren?
I don't know if you'd say I reached a high point, but so my current position is I am a high school science teacher. So I'm licensed in biology, but I also teach earth science.
Okay.
And I have had a really a convoluted path to get here, I'd say. I'm new into teaching, but I've always been involved in science. Like in the past, I was a zookeeper for a while.
Oh, wow.
I had a degree in environmental studies, so that was always been my interest. I just wasn't really sure how I wanted to use it for a while.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to be a doctor for a while. And so I was doing my bachelor's in biology, master's in neuroscience, and I was getting ready to apply to med school. I actually applied and got accepted, and then I met her and decided not to go. But mostly my job was managing clinical trials for a variety of diseases, things like psychiatry and GI were the fields I spent the most time in. So Alzheimer's, OCD, a lot of UC and IBD and all that kind of stuff. So that was what I did. My master's thesis was on Parkinson's. So that's kind of like my area is neurodegenerative diseases. But now I just work for a private data company trying to figure out when people are going to die.
Seems like a really interesting kind of position.
Yeah, I say it like that. It's more like actuary type of work.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not as fun as I make it sound.
People ask me all the time, is he an actuary? I'm like, no.
No.
So I don't really know what to say.
So can you share a little bit about your podcast and what it's about, and like also why you created it and why you decided to come up with this really cool podcast?
Take it away.
Oh, all right. Well, so our kind of elevator pitch is that we, Just NAS Science podcast is there to debunk science myths and misconceptions you commonly find online because they're incredibly
prominent and prevalent.
Yeah. And we just get a little salty about it. So that's a whole Na sodium kind of in our logo there. So for any of the confusion, which I know is a lot around but yeah, I mean, between the crazy misconceptions I hear in the classroom from my students, which like is a lot, and then the stuff you see online, especially Facebook, we just kind of felt like we were really fed up with all these misunderstandings ruling social media. I mean, they're just everywhere.
Yeah.
So, and they're not innocent misunderstandings either. A lot of them do have real consequences. So we figured we would do something about it.
Yeah. And I think from like my own experiences, like I grew up in a very, how do you say it? Politically saturated household to the right. So like I grew up like constantly being told that like climate change wasn't real and all these like just so much stuff like wasn't real. And it was just like a political kind of thing. I don't know how much you get into politics, but like that's kind of where my mind goes with like, when we get to science misconceptions, like my mind goes to like political inspired science misconceptions.
A lot of them are intertwined now.
Yeah. They're heavily, like Lauren said, intertwined. And if you listen to our show, you'll know where we stand pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
We never come out and explicitly say it. We leave it to the viewer or the listener rather to kind of pick up what we're putting down.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of a good stand to be on, to not like exclude people, but then to like not be ashamed of what you believe in.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's our whole thing is we don't want people to be embarrassed or like, we don't want them to feel bad that they believe some type of misconception. And that's not the goal of our show. Is we're not trying to put people on blast. We want to educate, and we try to do it in a funny way, and we try to make jokes and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, we try to be educational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I always go back to this saying when talking about the podcast, is that the reason why we really felt so strongly about starting this, and I think we started in December 2019.
Yes.
Right, is that that saying from, I think it's from Mark Twain, but it goes that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its shoes on. And I just feel like there was so many lies, so many misunderstandings being spread that I was like, we need more people to help the truth get its shoes on type of thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's like interesting how you started in like December 2019. So you had like a few months before you hit the massive like science misconceptions around COVID.
Yeah, and I feel weird or bad saying this, but the pandemic and coronavirus itself really helped our show because we started talking about it as early as January. And so we, on smaller podcast platforms like Castbox, they recognized us as a podcast that was giving information about COVID and coronavirus. So people found us because we were this kind of like central hub for coronavirus information. And I do think that helped us.
Absolutely. I think, especially in the beginning, most of our listeners were from Castbox because of that.
Yeah. And I think like, it's kind of like, you feel bad when saying that anything about COVID like helped you, but it's also like you probably helped society in that you were a podcast that people could listen to and actually get genuine, real information about these things from actual scientists.
Yeah, that's what we tell ourselves. That's what we tell ourselves before we go to sleep anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's like certain things in my life, like everyone's life changed, right, because of COVID. And it's like, I feel bad, like some ways my life was like better because I didn't have to go into a toxic lab anymore. But I'm like, you don't want to say that because you don't like want to say the high points of COVID.
Yeah, and in all fairness, there probably are no high points of COVID, but we still take some silver linings. Like it's happening, so we should celebrate the mini victories. At least I feel that way.
Yeah, I think it's important to focus on the few positives there are.
Yeah, I mean, life still happened, and there's going to be positives and negatives in your life during this period.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why do you think that people are so easy to believe in pseudoscience or scientific myths?
There's quite a few reasons. And we did a whole episode on this, that we interviewed a PhD candidate from Cambridge. And oddly enough, a few episodes later, we interviewed his mom without knowing. I was like, man, this is an impressive family. But he talked to us about, why do people believe in pseudoscience? And it really boils down to cognitive biases, right? Which is basically a systematic pattern of deviation from rationality. Or in layman's terms, right, your thinking causes you to come to the wrong conclusion about the world, right? It's like logically, rationally, it's not, the dots aren't connecting the way they should. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens.
Oh, I got to.
Go ahead.
So a lot of times our brains take mental shortcuts, and our brains do this all the time. For example, you could be out on a hike and you see an animal, partially obscured by trees and brushes, but you can still identify it as a deer or whatever it is. And your brain does that by making several assumptions. Well, your brain does that all the time. There are over 20 different biases. Did you just say that? There are over 20 different biases that a person can be subjected to.
Well, you have to keep in mind that you're filtering like millions of pieces of information every second. We're making so many decisions every second that we don't even realize anymore that your brain has to kind of create these shortcuts. And just sometimes these shortcuts kind of suck.
Yeah, that's layer 4 of the thalamus right there. Sensory input information. I got to throw a little neuroscience. This is a graduate podcast, right? So
yeah.
But one big one, I think, and one of the more common ones is confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So the idea that when you look at information, we're conscious or subconsciously looking for evidence that supports what we already believe.
And search engines do not help this, because if you start searching a couple of keywords, Google or whatever you're using is going to say, oh, this person is interested in this topic or this field, so let's show them more of that. And so it really almost doubled down on that confirmation bias.
Well, actually, not long ago, I was I was kind of exploring Facebook settings. I was like, let me just see like what they're really doing in here, like especially with the ad settings.
Nothing good.
And when you really like dig down several layers, like it tells you what it thinks your political affiliation is based on everything you're looking at, so it's kind of like, dang, like, yikes. I don't even know how to say it. It's a little scary to think about that. Also, yes, what you're looking at gets fed back to you. There's also the bandwagon effect, right? Obviously, it's sort of like this mob mentality. We're all familiar with the bandwagon effect, but for example, if you are scrolling through Instagram and you see a post with 1,000 likes on it, and then you see a conflicting post with 50 likes on it, you're automatically going to think, well, the post with 1,000 likes must be the correct one because everyone's liking it. It must be true. So, and a lot of times it's not. So you kind of get pulled into the wrong side of things.
Yeah, I think that is like the most innocent explanation for like, it's like not assuming anything. And I feel like that's what happens a lot is like, as like someone who's battling pseudoscience, they get defensive because they think if they believe something wrong, that means something bad about them. But then like the way that y'all explained it is like, we just have to be aware that we're doing these kind of shortcuts and filling in information that may not really be the true information there.
Yeah. And people are subject to confirmation bias, especially all the time. Like the first time, first impressions are big with that too. Maybe just by the way someone looks, they walk, they talk, you're kind of like using that, like something you have experienced before, using that to judge that person a lot of times. Another big one, I don't know if you want to talk about this one, the familiarity effect.
Familiarity backfire effect. And it's the idea that it's going to sound counterproductive to our podcast. But
okay.
The more we see something, even if it's false, the more we believe it because we're now familiar with it, even if we're exposed to the correct information. So trying to debunk a myth can remind them of what the myth is, and that just reinforces the myth, even though you've told them it's wrong. So
right.
I don't know how much help.
So basically our podcast may be reinforcing these myths. We're not really sure.
Yeah, but I think that's also really important when you look at like news and media outlets, in that when they're trying to combat a myth, they're constantly talking about it. So you hear it over and over again. And then when you look at just like headlines, it's always like just the myth appearing there instead of the correct information.
I hate headlines. Yeah, we cannot stand it because even with some like reputable, like pretty reputable, sources, they fall into that trap of like those catchy clickbait headlines. You're like, really Times or whatever, like, come on, you're better than that.
Yeah, and it's hard because they want the clicks, they want the traffic. So how do you do it in an age where everyone is doing clickbait type ads or headlines, whatever? You need to keep up with that, and it's a problem. It's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I think this like conversation kind of reminds me of this like one quote I read sometime, and I'm gonna butcher it, but basically it's that some people will look at a problem and see a solution and think that they're the only ones that have discovered it, and then other people will look at a problem, see a solution, and say that like there must be something that the experts know that I don't, which is why this isn't quite working. And I think a lot of people haven't moved to that kind of level to be like, maybe I don't have all the information when I'm trying to think about something, especially in like the science field where a lot of people don't really want the in detail information in the science.
Right. And that's I think a big thing, a big problem with science sometimes is that it's not public friendly, like, a lot of people don't want to read a scientific journal because of all of the vocabulary that is far beyond their understanding and reach. It's just going to be a waste of time. So I think communicating that information for everyone to understand is something science needs to get better at doing.
Yeah.
And as someone in graduate school, sometimes you could be looking for a scientific article that you want to read, and then it's like, $30 for 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not doing that.
So yeah, it's too much. There's a lot of knowledge obstacles in terms of understanding things in science a lot.
Barriers to entry.
That's a better way of saying it for sure. Not a barrier to entry.
Yeah, and I think or I guess maybe this is being optimistic, but I think things are kind of starting to change with like a lot of people in like grad school kind of getting interested in like SciComm, and then like people really being advocates for like open science.
Yeah, I think open source journals in science is really important, but at the same time, and I'm going to say this, and I'm not trying to offend or anyone or be mean, but the vast majority of people don't know how to read scientific articles.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to do scientific research because that's a skill. It's a learned skill.
What do you mean? Wait, watching YouTube videos isn't research?
Yeah, like, or you can watch all the documentaries you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because they're filmed with a point, with an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this all the time, especially on things like Facebook and Twitter. So you'll ask someone a question or you'll make a statement. They're like, "Oh, do your research." And it's like, well, you don't know how to do research. So why don't you mind your business?
Yeah, there's a very skewed conception about what research is. So
yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like people think like Googling something, back again to the whole Google thing. Like if I throw in some keywords on Google, then I'm gonna get the full story and I've done my research now. If they're even the people that get to that stage. And then it's also realizing the confirmation bias that you said earlier, that the keywords you're using is gonna tell you what you want to hear instead of maybe what the truth is.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I learned a long time ago, that you have to research the other side.
Mm-hmm.
If we just did an episode on microwaves, like your microwave oven. People think that your microwave oven's trying to kill you, and it's not. And so you read these articles about why it's bad, and the article will say something like, "Oh, the microwave causes the molecules or the atoms of your food to vibrate." And it's like, yeah, that's how all food's heated up. And so you can see where like this skewed idea of like this, like my molecules are being affected by the microwave. Right. It's like, dude, it's everything.
Yeah, that's how basically all heat's generated.
Yeah.
So you people can do a research. I'm using quotes here. And they'll see like, oh, well, it's causing my atoms to vibrate faster than normal. It's like, if you don't have the scientific understanding or background or knowledge to know that that's just how heat is transferred, energy is accelerated in atomic structures, then that's going to sound really scary.
Yeah. And I think that happens like a lot with and like something that comes to mind is like with vaccines, just kind of in general, but like people being like, well, why can't we just like expose ourselves to a innocuous version of it? And we're like, that's what a vaccine is.
I know. I've seen that. Someone posted that on Facebook or something. I was like, why can't we just like take a weakened version of the virus and do that? Yeah. It's like, people assume that vaccines don't cause natural immunity because they don't know how vaccines actually function physiologically and biologically. So they have this really warped understanding of what's happening.
Which that one really pisses me off because I teach how vaccines work. So I'm like, so did you just not pay attention in high school? Like, because we went over this. So
you are assuming this person graduated high school.
I mean, even me who like graduated from a math and science school, I absolutely never learned how vaccines worked until grad school.
Really? So
yeah.
It's part of the curriculum, at least in New York, for the reading exam. You have to teach it in the homeostasis unit. And I think it's great, but I just think teenagers will be teenagers and they just kind of don't care at that time. You know, they're not going to remember it 10 years later. So
yeah, I mean, I got my high school degree in Alabama, so we can talk about educational state requirements there.
Yep. I won't go.
Where was the guy we interviewed?
Mississippi.
We interviewed a science teacher from Mississippi, and I think you two would have a lot to talk about.
Probably. My brother-in-law is actually from Mississippi, and like in Alabama, we're always like, but we're not Mississippi. Like we're better in most categories. We're better.
Mississippi, it tends to be like the lowest ranking for a lot of things education. So I heard that there's a saying around the area that like, thank God for Mississippi. You know, it's like at least they're not the last. You know what I mean? Mississippi takes that. So
yeah.
But like you were saying before, that we just brought up the vaccine. That's a good example of another, not like a bias, but a logical fallacy that if something, it's called the appeal to nature. Appeal to nature. That if something is not natural, it's bad for you. And if something is natural, it must be good for you. It's like no, like the sun could not have any negative effect on you at all.
Go ahead, eat every mushroom you find. It'll be totally cool.
Or like arsenic, naturally occurring. That must be cool, right? I mean,
what about the girl who was just holding the blue-ringed octopus?
Oh yeah,
it's like a 2-inch octopus, and it's extremely deadly.
Yeah,
and she's just handling it.
She had no idea.
Nothing because she didn't know. And she filmed it and put it on TikTok, and people were like, "You're lucky you survived."
Yeah.
So
I think that's like, as a chemist, I always like the two words that always drive me insane is organic and chemical free. Because they're just like thrown around, and I'm like, do you not realize everything that you eat is organic, or else you should not be eating it? Like, it's just made of carbon. That's what organic means.
Yep. Listen, I understand your frustration because we've actually interviewed she's a dietitian and personal trainer, and we interviewed her twice because it's such a wide and expanse topic, the idea of nutrition, organic. And the most recent interview, we talked more specifically about like organic foods and the dirty dozen and all this kind of stuff. And I wrote an accompanying blog post for that episode, and I was like, you understand that when you use the word chemical, you are not just talking about the preservatives that are being added to your. You're talking about the chemicals that cause your strawberries to have red skin or to be sweet and all these other things. Like, then naturally occurring chemicals, you just use the media or social media influencer definition of chemical, and that's a problem.
Right, or people post a picture of like a molecule and be like, I don't want this in my food. And like, I can eat a strawberry and be like, oh guys, don't eat this. Psych, it's a strawberry. Like, everything is molecular, and people just don't get that,
Yeah, and I think whenever I first started in grad school, the first thing that they gave us in our safety course was the SDS sheet for water, but had it marked out. And like, it has warnings on it. And then they ask you, well, what do you think this molecule is? And if you're smart, you're going to say, well, I have no idea based off the warnings of it. But like, people will like give out answers, and then they'll be like, yeah, it's water. And we're just like, wait, what?
Yeah. I mean, listen, there was a woman who, granted, it was a contest, but she drank a gallon of water without going to the bathroom.
A wee for a wee.
And don't wee for a wee. And she wound up dying because she, like, her cells literally exploded from all the water.
Hypernatremia.
Yeah, hypernatremia. So it was, it's wild, but everything is dangerous. And usually when I talk about chemicals, and I think in the most recent episode we talked about this, the idea that the dose matters. The dose is the thing that matters typically.
Right.
So
we talked about it in the baby food episode.
Yeah, we did an episode about heavy metals and baby food.
Oh, okay.
That was actually not very good.
Yeah, that was slightly concerning. So, and that's not usually the case. So.
Yeah, but anyway, so we can go on and on about all these different logical fallacies and shortcuts that your brain takes, but the idea is to be aware of them. I think that's something that's really important.
Right. Yeah. And I think specifically for because this show is all about, grad students, how do you think, or why do you think it's important that grad students start focusing on maybe even identifying their own misconceptions about science and then starting to try and combat them in public? I mean, grad students have a lot on them already. Why do you think this is something that's important for grad students to start considering and maybe even taking on?
I think it's really important because there is this idea or this notion that scientists and medical staff are robotic and that they are incapable of being wrong. And if a scientist or someone is wrong, then all of science is wrong. And if we can kind of humanize scientists a little bit, like, hey, I made a mistake. Just like you messed up at work last week, I messed up too. It's okay. We identified the problem. We fixed it. Here you go. And the idea of being able to, and there's been studies about this with doctors who if a doctor is upfront about a mistake, explained why the mistake happened, how they plan on fixing it and preventing it from happening again in the future, they're more likely to retain or earn back trust from patients than doctors who try to pretend they never make a mistake and cover it up.
Right.
So being able to say, hey, we're people, I think is a really important aspect to, when science changes, because science is always changing, it might be a little easier for the general public to understand that, we advance our knowledge.
Yeah. And I think in general, it's just a duty for anyone, especially in the age of social media, where everybody's an expert, right? It is a duty for anyone with kind of extensive knowledge on a topic to help combat these misconceptions. So it's not even just graduate students, right? But you guys are embarking on becoming a little bit more of an expert in a field, right? With your graduate studies, maybe go on to become a PhD and then eventually work in that field.
Yeah.
But I think what Nick said, or what you mentioned, is being aware of your own bias is really the first and biggest step, because it wasn't until I had to go to some mandatory implicit bias training for my job where it really opened up my eyes, and I was like, my God, I never thought about half this stuff, because it's just what my brain automatically does. So I think it's really important to open yourself up, which is uncomfortable for a lot of people to be like, I don't have any biases. So many people say things like, I don't see color or something.
God, that's my mom.
There's biases in everything we do, for every decision we make. So it's important to recognize that. Really.
Yeah. And I think, talking about your biases, I think that's easier to get in more of a society context, because you're especially when you said, I don't see color, racial bias is always something that that's talked about more than scientific bias. And whether you're going to take in information and think about it in a certain way, even if you don't have all the facts. And so I think it's something that we have to, even as scientists, whenever you're embarking on a study, you want to kind of address what are your biases about this population you're studying, because if you have those biases, that may come through and actually change your results. And a lot of people don't understand that and think, oh, well, if they did a study, that's it. That is the groundbreaking knowledge, and there was nothing that could have ever changed the results that they got in that study.
You see this a lot with any type of research or information regarding human evolution and anthropology.
Yeah.
The second you say, oh, I think this might have happened instead of whatever, the idea is, evolution's wrong, scientists are rewriting history, and it's like, whoa, we just found some data, some evidence to support something, and we're making a claim, we're making a suggestion, and we need more research to find out if we're correct. So and personally, going back to what you just said about which is essentially limitations in studies. That's one of the first things I go and look at when I'm doing research for an episode. The first thing I go and look at for any scientific study I look at is who published it. Are there any affiliations to it? Because that's important to know regarding bias. And what are the limitations of the study? Was it a really small sample? Did a lot of the subjects drop out or anything like that? That's really important to know so you don't make a quick decision off it.
Right. And I think to be confident in any field and to truly understand it, right, you have to identify your own bias and like Nick said, you have to understand the other side. Otherwise, I think you are really holding yourself back in what you can do with that topic in that field.
Yeah. And I think from my own experience, I mean, I work in chemistry, right? So it's odd in that, I guess to me, and maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, but to me, it seems to make more sense to acknowledge your biases when you're working more with humans. Whereas when you're working with something like chemicals, it's oh, there's not that many biases in there, but there's your own biases and you want your findings to be real and you want your methods to work. And I remember I published one paper. I don't remember if it was a review or a research paper. And someone was like, you need to really delve into the limitations that this study has, because the way you're writing it is like this study could move directly into medical diagnoses, but the research does not support that. And so they actually like made me add in a limitation section on what really is the limits of how this research could be used. And I think that's something that like if more journals actually just like a results section or a conclusion section, like actually made you think about the limitations of your own results, which is like interesting because when you write proposals, you have to do that anyways, or they're really not going to fund you. But when you write results, you want to make it seem like this is the magic cure for everything. And I think that helps to increase the public's misunderstanding of results and scientific data.
And listen, I could see how that could backfire too.
Okay.
I could see how someone who maybe is not familiar with science may read something like that and look at the patient section and be like, see, they admitted right there that this isn't, and it's like, well, but like, you have to understand science isn't an end all be all. And yes, I think a lot of people don't realize science is always in flux and it's always changing.
Right.
And I think that causes a lot of people to be mistrusting of it. And I think we saw that firsthand with COVID because the public had a firsthand look at something being researched and explored in real time and not just getting the results from 50 years ago. Like, and people were like, well, at first they said no mass, but now they're saying mass. So obviously I don't believe them. I'm like, come on, like they're saying no mass because there were none. Leave it for the medical professionals who really need it,
Right.
So like people are not good at taking changing advice, I guess.
Yeah, they want like a commandments of science and like write it in stone and it never changes.
And we've said this before in a previous episode. We interviewed a guy named John Schwabish, who is a data visualization expert, and I believe he's an economist. And the title of the episode was "Data Doesn't Lie, but it can be misleading." And we in the episode we gave the example. I think it was like the company Post-it, or the guy who like founded Post-it or whatever, said that like information on bright paper is processed by your brain like 6,000 times faster. It's like, man, it's really hard to believe that the guy from Post-it would lie about that. Like,
it's not like he wants us to buy Post-its or something.
Yeah, you would think that he would. So like understanding that there's some limitation, or that, maybe what he's saying has a kernel of truth, but are you using the data properly? And, you talk about, I mean, we have some fail safes in science with alphas and confidence intervals and all this kind of stuff, but people don't understand that. They don't learn about that because who's taking advanced statistics except for like us three?
Right.
Really even me.
Who's taking advanced statistics except us two?
I mean, I haven't taken a grad level statistics, so maybe we count it, but
yeah. And I mean, an example that I have, like kind of when you talk about how data can be misleading, is when I was in like high school, an admissions person for a medical school, like came and talked to us because a lot of people at my high school wanted to go to med school. And he showed us a graph and he was like, okay, here's the percentage of each undergrad major that made it into med school. And it was like biology was like 12% of those with biology majors actually made it into med school. And then you saw the music major and the music was 100%. And he was like, do you know why? Like, all of you are about to go major in music to go to med school. And he was like, there was one person who applied and he got in and he was a music. And so you need to be careful of how you interpret data, and especially even as a scientist, how you make figures to really capture the whole story.
And how you present it is important. So my guess is, however that guy presented that data probably wasn't even the best way to present it. It's like choosing the right graph. I mean, he was probably doing that to make a point.
Right, he was doing it to make a point.
In general, like you have to be really careful about the statistical test you choose, and then the graph you choose to show it and stuff. So it makes a huge, huge difference.
I think it was Fox News, which shouldn't surprise anyone. I think you already know where I'm going with this.
The pie graph? Pie chart?
They showed there was a pie chart. I don't remember exactly what that was.
The pie chart didn't even add up to 100%. It was like wild. I don't even know.
But they had another one. It was like a line graph that showed job loss or job gain over time. And when they looked at President Trump's, they used one scale, and which was a smaller scale to make the graph larger. And then they looked back at Obama at the same time frame of his presidency. And
wasn't it like upside down the data or something?
They used a larger scale to like shrink the job loss and gain and stuff, so that it looked like President Trump was doing more job-wise. But if you actually look at the numerical values, that was not true. So you can definitely take data that and make someone believe something else just based on how you present it. It's very, very scary.
Yeah, I think all the time I like watch like the news with my partner, and I'll be like, wait a second, that doesn't make like, and I mean, I'm not watching like particularly Fox News, but even like other news sources can put up graphs thinking they're saying one thing, and I'm like, hold up, you have those scales, like one will be like 10,000 and the other one will be 100, and I'm like, you can't show those at the same time. Like people are gonna not understand what that means.
Right.
Yeah.
And who has, and I get like, who has time to delve into that with our busy lives, and dinner, and you know what I mean? Like it's a lot. So I don't expect everyone to go and like analyze graphs that they're shown from the news. So.
Even in all fairness, even if you wanted to, the news shows it for a couple of seconds. You probably don't even have the time to process that graph truly.
Your brain probably takes a shortcut and is like, hey, that looks really drastic. And then you believe whatever misconception is thrown up there. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to say that the person who's making it is not doing it intentionally.
Right.
But
it probably is.
I mean, you know, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and just say that they're bad at their job, which isn't much better.
Well, I think it's hard because it depends on what their job is in the person who's putting it up there, because they just may not be educated in reading scientific graphs or being like, hey, because I remember like one of them was like COVID cases in like New York versus Mississippi. And they showed the same line, but like literally one of the y-axes was like 100 times the other one. And they were talking, and I was just like, I get that you're not trying to make that conclusion that they're the same, but that's what your readers are going to understand. And they're not the same. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Just population density in New York is way higher than it is in
Mississippi.
Pretty much anywhere else.
Oh, yeah.
Fair.
So yeah, no, that is a very important thing to note. And that's why I think it's important to use things like per 100,000 people that you see in epidemiology and keep the scale the same. But even then, I think it's hard for the average person to understand 100, you know, how big or small 11 out of 100,000 is. I mean, like, when was the last time you saw 100,000 people?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like when you said that reminds me of like, I don't know if it was going around social media or something, but it was like explaining wealth with rice. And so it was like the common household income, and then like Jeff Bezos, right? And so I don't know, he's probably worth like what, 6 billion now? I don't know. But like you hear that number and you go, oh, that seems like a lot. But you really in your mind have no perception of what that really means.
Yeah. It's really crazy. And that's actually one of the key concepts we're supposed to be teaching in the science curriculum right now is scale. You know, and it's really difficult to teach that stuff sometimes, but I think they're recognizing that it's really important, and a lot of people don't really understand it very well.
What do you think? Because like you're kind of explained like why grad students should care, but like what do you think graduate students can really do at this point to really start battling misconceptions in science?
Yeah, I mean, you can always do what you and I have done, is start a podcast.
That's what I think. Start a podcast. Everybody's doing it.
We have a blog post. A lot of times, it's not always the case, but a lot of times when I write these blog posts, I include additional information or additional background information that the listener may not know. Because the whole idea of our show is to explain something that's probably a little complicated in terms of scientific knowledge or understanding. So they listen to the show. There's really very little hardcore science on that. We do our best to try to keep it simple. And I think that's something that graduate students can do. It's very easy to just start running with an idea. I do this all the time. I'm doing it right now.
When Nick gets hooked on an idea, there's literally no stopping. And let me tell you something, he's got a new idea every month, so it's a lot of ideas.
Well, you know, someone needs to keep the content rolling. So but being able to write something or make a videos are great. Just a quick thing of something that they're passionate about or they understand. Maybe they saw. I remember we were in Sephora and there was a sign that said 90% of people who use this product saw clearer skin or something. And it's like, how many people did they test?
Right.
How much clearer was their skin? How long did they have to use it for? Did they use anything else? Like there are all these questions that this little data or this little piece of data isn't giving. And so I made a video that says, hey, here was the sign we saw. When you see this, you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to buy this because it's going to make my cleanse. But no, you have to ask these questions. So being able to see something in the real world and explain how someone can view it from a different angle, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, but I mean, I think most important thing for graduates to start doing is to think about how you're going to talk to people who aren't involved in science so that they understand, whether you do write a blog or you create a vlog, right? TikTok is so popular.
Oh, yeah.
So there's this, I think it's Dr. Mike, this doctor.
You think Dr. Mike is from TikTok? He's been around for years.
No, I know, but like it's in digestible bits on TikTok where younger people can see it and it's digestible and it's funny. It's almost fun to like watch him sometimes talk about like how crazy these people are being like, that is not real, like that, please don't do that, and you're like, oh, this is digestible, it's relatable, I can understand this. And I think, like we said earlier, that's kind of what's missing in science. So to sort of humanize it, however speaks to you to do that, I think is great.
And the last like way graduate students can do it that I know of, and this is actually from there's a group of healthcare professionals who are trying to combat misinformation and also disinformation. There are groups of people who are going out there and intentionally putting wrong information out into the world. So when they talk about it from a clinical perspective, but this is something that we could apply to family, friends, people on social media. It's a little harder with people on social media, but I did this with my sister yesterday, and it's the idea of they tell you something that is wrong, scientifically and factually is wrong. Do not instantly correct them, which is something I like to do. Instead, find out why they think that. Where did they get that information from?
Yes.
And then you could start to educate them slowly on, well, here's why that source is wrong, or have you checked other sources? And you can kind of get to the bottom of why they are taking in this incorrect information. And it usually comes from, well, I saw it on social media. And then you can get into a more important conversation of social media is not used for research like that.
Right.
Please, for the love of God, don't use social media.
And there's nothing wrong with explaining why what the person is doing is wrong. But the last thing you want to do is tell you that microwave ovens are bad for you, and you're like, no, they're not. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm a scientist. I know what I'm like. That there is no faster way to get that person to shut down and not believe you.
Yeah, so I think it's important the idea to invite them in, right? Also, when you ask why, you can sort of get an idea of what biases or fallacies is leading them to believe that. And then, like Nick said, just help them kind of break it down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's similar. I don't know what class I remember this in, but in like psychology, it's like you don't contradict someone because that puts them on the defensive. Instead, you give them a platform to explain their opinion, and then you talk with them about it to then renegotiate that opinion.
Yeah, and it's a process that might not happen instantly. It might take 2, 3, 4 sessions of discussion or individual conversations, which is why I said it's pretty hard to do with people on social media, because the first thing they want to do is insult you and then block you. So family and friends, it's a little easier to do because you're going to talk to them, even if you get into a fight with them over it. It's really important to stay calm, level, and not just throw that I'm a scientist, I'm in grad school card back in their face, because again, they are,
oh boy,
it's not going to be received well, even though you might really want to do it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it happens with my dad quite a bit. We butt heads all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I find that like to be a really similar perspective, because again, like I come from a family that's very not scientists. Let's use that word. They're not scientists. And so like when I have like conversations with them, it's really hard to try and navigate them because I'm like, I don't know what to say to you besides the fact that you're wrong right now. Like you really are, you're just wrong. But I think it's also, I think like to protect your own self, you have to recognize what battles are worth it. Like who is willing to receive, like who's willing to have that conversation and have it really be a back and forth conversation. And then like other people just are not, and maybe they're influenced by certain reasons why they need to hold on to these values so tightly. And I think when you're butting up against that's much harder of a battle than when you're butting up against someone just hearing something on social media and believing it's correct.
Right. Yeah. And that goes, I love the saying is that when you argue with a fool, all you do is prove that there's two fools. Right. So knowing your battles and knowing who to argue with, and like I know my dad is not going to change his beliefs. So I just kind of try to avoid those conversations with him now, because all it led to was arguing and then who's hanging up on who. Like it really gets so intense because we both feel very strongly about, our beliefs. So yeah, just knowing that, accepting it is what it is.
One of us thinks that you shouldn't inject bleach into your veins to combat coronavirus, and the others believe they should. It's a whole mess.
I don't have words for that. I'm sorry. I just don't. There's no, I actually watched that live.
Yeah, we did too. It was horrifying.
I was like, I literally got up and walked out of the room. I was like, I don't even know what to say.
Sometimes it's like, I don't even know how you could believe it. I don't even know where to begin.
Listen, I know where to begin. I say he tries it. It was, I don't. If
that's a whole different topic.
No,
anyone listening, please don't do that.
That's a joke. It's a joke. I don't want anyone to do that ever.
It's just like really sad when you hear like, especially like as we talked about, and I guess we'll go back to like coronavirus misinformation and around like really early on, like hydroxychloroquine, and how people actually died from ingesting, what is it, like fish cleaner? Or fish,
fish food or something.
Fish food, that has it in it. And it was something, I don't know if it was like the rocks in the bottom or the cleaner. It's something to do with fish. But there was like a couple that actually died because they were trying to prevent coronavirus. And it's also like having to understand, like, just because something has the same name doesn't mean it's the same thing. And I think like that comes up a lot with like mercury in vaccines. You hear about mercury being in vaccines, but it's like, you have to understand mercury is chelated in vaccines. So it's going to work and like nobody understands that. And I don't know why I'm like trying to explain it.
Or alcohol, like methyl and ethyl alcohol.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with mercury, or methyl mercury, ethyl mercury, the different things. And one you're going to get from fish and one you're going to get in vaccines. One's way safer than the other because it gets broken down a lot faster. We actually did a whole episode on vaccines and stuff. So I
feel very strongly about this.
We actually, that episode, we had to start the recording over twice because I just so early on, I was getting so mad. And you heard it in my voice.
Yeah, I was like, calm down. We got to try this again.
Yeah, and again, I think that goes with you're trying to fill in information. So you don't have the information to understand methyl versus ethyl, which is like what you learn in organic chemistry. And so you hear alcohol and you go, okay, well, these three things are the same. They're connected together because they're all alcohols. But it's like, you don't drink rubbing alcohol, which is isopropyl, versus, and you really don't drink methanol, but you do drink ethanol, as I'm doing right now. So
I know I emailed you and told you we were going to have an alcohol drink, but I forgot to get White Claw because I am a basic white girl. And
I was afraid if I had a beer, I would instantly fall asleep. Fridays are tough.
Lauren is lightweight, to put it politely.
Okay, well, you try teaching for a week and see how you feel on a Friday.
No, I work from home. I don't need to do that.
Exactly.
That's fair. But yeah, I think like the point you made earlier where we try and connect things together. even if they're not actually connected together, but we assume those connections is something that even like as grad students, being aware of that in both how you receive information and how you give information.
Yep. And that's actually one of the tips I had for identifying and combating misconceptions and pseudoscience is like one of the number one things to look for is people trying to connect the dots that don't really quite fit together.
Or even exist.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like hard because it's like some conspiracies you're just like, I don't understand. But then like it's like so loosely connected dots. And you're like, if you don't understand, like, I guess that's what science misconceptions kind of are in a degree, is people loosely connecting dots that the connection isn't really there, and then coming up with these grand conclusions about it.
Right.
It's like flat Earth, and it's one of my favorite ones. It was actually the first episode we ever did was on flat Earth. And it's like the government's lying to us, scientists are lying. It's like, why of all things would we lie about the shape of the planet? Like, what does that accomplish?
Right.
Who's benefiting?
Flat Earth Society.
It makes no sense, and you see this all the time with other things, like this idea of like these super secret agencies like the Illuminati that are controlling everything. It's like, why would they want people to wear masks? Like, if they're trying to control us, wouldn't they want to know who we are?
Yeah.
Like, none of it makes sense. Oh, the government vaccines just want to get us sick. Why would the government want us to get us sick? We work and we pay taxes.
Yeah, we pay taxes. We pay for them to do their stuff. That's how the government
gets their money.
Yeah.
None of those arguments make any sense if you even take a minute to think about them in some logical fashion. But here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was like off social media and didn't really watch TV for like most of my life. And I have recently, as I became more of like an entrepreneur, got on social media. And now I hear about these myths and misconceptions like through social media. And so like, I remember recently there was like a video, and because like Twitter has their like trending on the side, right? Yeah. And like one of them was like video of Biden on South Lawn, fact checked as real. And I was like, what is the purpose of this? And I like went into it because I just needed to know why they were fact checking a video to be real. And basically I stumbled upon this conspiracy that a certain group of people believe that President Trump is still president, and he's making it look like Biden is actually president, but he's holding all the strings. And I'm like, who does that benefit? Like, one, that doesn't benefit Trump. Two, that doesn't benefit anyone. Like, no one would want to make it seem like Biden won, and especially Trump would not want to make it seem like he lost.
Right. Someone who is as egotistical and narcissistic, why would he ever allow, like, it?
But I saw that. I know what you're talking about. Like, and those people also believe the Capitol's secretly been moved to Mar-a-Lago.
I did not know that.
No.
A lot of individuals who, and you said this before, they aren't willing to listen. It's like quitting smoking. You're not going to quit until you decide you're going to quit. You can you can try as hard as you want, but until you're like set it on quitting, you're not going to. Until you're set on being open-minded and getting some education or listening to someone else, it's not going to matter.
And I think that a lot of times comes down to like these myths or conspiracies feel like they're benefiting you until they're not. And I think like that was really commonplace with like COVID, where people would be really, what do you call them? Anti-maskers, I guess. And then like all of a sudden them or someone really close to them would get really, really sick with COVID. And they're like, guys, I messed up. And it's like, you have to get to that point.
Yeah, and it sucks. And we say it all the time. It's like, actually, this is really serious. We should take it, seriously. And it's like, bro, like, until it affected you, you didn't give a shit about what happened to all these other people. So, like, I kind of don't really feel bad for you. Like, that really bothered me. I just saw it so much. I'm like, how could you be that selfish and that much in your own bubble that you don't give a shit about? I'm sorry, you don't care about anybody else being sick, like the hell with them.
Yeah,
that really bothers me.
It is problematic because it's not real until it happens to me.
Right.
There are so many things in the world that are not happening to you at this moment, but are happening to other people, whether you want to.
Are very real.
It's kind of like that out of sight, out of mind type of thing. Like that's a really poor way to view the world, to think that like, well, I'm not hungry, so no one else is starving. Like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah, and it's like, I guess it's weird for me because, like, again, I grew up in a very right wing, I'm trying to use good words to explain this, but like I very like right winged believed that they were right. And so I was like inundated with that. And so I know what it's like to have that perspective. And then like having changed so much through education and through learning, like it took till my senior year of college for a professor to actually explain climate change to me. And I'm like, wait, why did I believe that this wasn't real? But it was like, because I was told that all the time. And just like learning to challenge those things and realize that everyone has different experiences. And that's why you need to listen to a diverse group of people and not just listen to the same people who are going to confirm what you already feel and believe.
That's my favorite is 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds who are like, President Trump was the best president we've ever had. It's like, dude, you don't know anything. Like, you're just regurgitating what you've heard your parents say in the living room to their friends. Like, you don't know. Like, why would you even say that? Like, talk about Pokemon. I'm 31. I still want to talk about Pokemon. Like,
my partner's about to turn 32, and they still want to talk about Pokemon all the time. Like, still play the games, still watch the shows.
Have them hit me up.
That's last night. He's like, come on, play a couple games of Pokemon with me. I'm like, oh.
She did it very begrudgingly.
Yeah, we bought the really low cost Switch so that I could play Pokemon with them, and I played it for 2 days and was like,
I'm more of a card player.
Yeah. I played Pokemon cards when I was really, really little once, and I could not even tell you what it was about.
We basically have to play open hands. It's like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what this is.
Yeah. So what tips or resources do you have for identifying and combating misconceptions? And especially for grad students, what would you tell them to kind of move forward in doing that?
Well, I think what we mentioned before is to invite people into the conversation and really asking them why, right? Start to understand where people are coming from, what biases they hold, and or fallacies. So you can start to understand what misconceptions or what conspiracy theories they're being affected by. And with a quick Google search, you can look up how to identify conspiracy theory. And I think maybe it's Scientific American where I pulled it's my favorite list because it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, you can quickly Google 7 signs of a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And
they're good.
You're going to look through this list and be like, I've seen all of these in the past week.
So for example, some of them are connecting the dots, right? Mm-hmm. The conspiracy theory is always super complex, and its successful completion demands a large number of elements. So, what you were just talking about, Biden's just a statue of a president and super complex. Mm-hmm. Or it involves a large number of people who all need to keep silent and are being involved in this. And
it's like the coronavirus vaccines, all of pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers and doctors and FDA members and everyone involved is all in on it. And it's I know I'm not a traditional scientist, but I didn't get my invitation to the big super secret meeting about how it's going to kill us all.
Yeah.
So, it's unfortunate. I did have to miss it.
But yeah, just to say, people are terrible at keeping secrets. That would never happen. People love to brag, whether it's because they're involved in something exclusive, right? Or they're gaining power from something. That would never happen because people would want to talk about it.
Right.
What about any movie, TV show, anything ever? How many leaks are there?
Yeah.
For anything? You can't even send a naked photo to someone without it coming out on the internet. Like, come on.
You say it like from experience.
That's not important. What is important is identifying all this stuff. I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
But another one I pulled out of the list that I think is it always encompasses like this grand ambition for control over a nation or an economy, or, a political system, some sort of world domination, which don't get me wrong, there definitely are people out there who have grand ambitions and who want world domination, but it can't be all the time. It can't be everything. Mask can't be involved world domination. Like, because you wear a mask, you're a sheep and I'm like, no, like a mask is not going to gain somebody world domination. I'm sorry. Me wearing a mask is not going to do that. So it just can't be everything.
Bill Gates gets this all the time. Yeah. Like he's constantly being accused of trying to take over the world. And it's like, apparently Bill Gates wants to microchip us with these vaccines. And it's like mind control. It's like, what is Bill Gates going to do? Make us all get rid of our iPhones and buy a Zune? Like, come on.
A Zune. Oh my gosh. That was a throwback.
Yeah.
What is Bill Gates going to do with world domination? Like, for real.
Or also, it's like, they don't need to microchip us. We all carry a phone in our pocket. Mm-hmm. And that tracks us perfectly fine. Or Easy Pass, or whatever you guys, I don't know if you guys have Easy Pass where you are. Every time you drive through a toll booth and automatically takes all your information, like everything we do is listening all the time.
Or even just walking down the street, there are security cameras that the government has put there to monitor crime. And
right.
You're being tracked. You just are. If you have an iPhone and you use Face ID, guess what? Your face is in a database.
Yeah.
It just is. Just get the vaccine. Let them microchip you, whatever.
Yeah, I think there's like a implicit bias that if someone's trying to help you, they have something to gain from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I never let anyone help me.
I don't think that was the point of that comment, but okay.
I know. I think even especially as New Yorkers, you're always like suspicious of people.
Constantly.
Always. You just do not talk to anybody coming up to you.
The little old lady on the subway, packing heat.
Yeah. So there's, and I'm sure there's an evolution reasoning for that. You can't just everybody. Obviously that could be a problem too. But I do think we need to be a little bit more open to like, hey, there are some people who genuinely want to do some good in this world and leave a legacy of philanthropy or something. Not everything is to track what you watch on your TV or whatever, who cares?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like we as people want to be like, we want to do good, but then we don't believe it when someone else is actually doing good.
Maybe we're jealous. I don't know.
Probably.
And there's a lot of it. I mean, evolutionarily, altruistic genes would get filtered out because they would be less fit for an environment because they're giving up food or a mate or offering protection or something. Right. And whereas selfish genes tend to get propagated because they survive more easily.
Yeah, but I think that like as society like compartmentalizes, which is what we've done, like we're no longer, everyone's not spending their job getting food and staying alive. Right. And so as you compartmentalize, all altruistic genes actually start being more flourishing because you actually start increasing your population and really thriving when people are altruistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, but I still think there's some element of that suspicion because
I think for the individual, selfish genes are more beneficial, but for the population, obviously the altruistic gene does play a role. And then there's some species like meerkats and stuff where it's really important for the survival of the group and the species, but it can be really harmful for that one guy who's given the alarm call, and giving away his prairie dogs, who's giving away his location to the predators. But everybody, it has its give and takes, and I think it's very complicated, that idea of altruistic versus selfish, and we'll never have like a black and white answer on what to do and how to act, so it's in flux all the time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, but
that's my phrase for today.
You're in flux. Everything's in flux. We just need to get used to it.
I'm sorry, I cut you off to
Oh,
say
no,
something.
you're good. You're good. I actually don't even remember what I was about to say, so it's okay.
Oh, great. I ruined this now.
No, you're good. But yeah, I think just like for the grad students that are like kind of listening, just being aware of your own biases and then starting to have conversations with other people and actually sharing your knowledge and not just thinking that it's always not worth your time to try and spread good information about things because you have skills that the general public can't really just easily get or haven't spent their time going to graduate school to learn how to do scientific research. So having those conversations with people, which would actually probably make you even better at your own science, because now you understand how to communicate your science better. And I think like all the time, even as, experts in your field, whenever you're like sending out proposals or even research papers, you have to talk to people who are in other fields who don't
Yeah.
really understand what you do. And so even getting engaged in trying to combat science misinformation is actually in the end benefiting you and making you a better scientist.
Yeah, I mean, they say you haven't really mastered something until you could teach it to someone else. It really only helps you reinforce your knowledge and your craft.
Yeah.
And I'd say a lot of people aren't great at talking to other people, especially in a way that invites them in, like we were suggesting. So get out there and get some practice. Start with your family, because it's usually the harder.
That is true. It actually would be easier not to start with your family.
But yeah, getting practice on how to talk to people, because that's not an easy thing. That's a skill in itself. How to talk to people and have a productive conversation over just butting heads with someone.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I think this was a very interesting and enlightening conversation, especially taking like something that I see so much in like SciComm and like actually bringing it into the general grad student who maybe doesn't want to have a podcast or doesn't want to have a blog, and how they can start really contributing to it and how it values or how it will be valuable to them in the long run. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Oh, anytime.
Thanks for having us.
And do you want to give a shout out to your podcast and let people know where they can find it at?
I was going to ask if you wanted to know, but you don't even know where it is. You can find all of our blog posts, YouTube videos, podcast episodes, all that on our website, justnascience.com. That's justnascience.com. Our podcast is on every single platform. If you listen on Castbox or Google, Apple, you can
anywhere you listen to podcasts, we're there.
And we do also live stream. We typically on Saturdays at 12 p.m. Eastern record our podcast live on Twitch.
Okay.
So you can twitch.tv/justnascience. And afterwards, we always do some kind of discussion. It usually turns pretty nerdy.
Yeah.
Like Lord of the Rings, one week we spent like an hour discussing the taxonomy of chips and like what constitutes a chip and what isn't, and like classifying different foods as chips and stuff. It was, I enjoyed it because I'm a huge nerd, but
Yeah, and I'll have those links below. And then you are also on Twitter. Can you shout out your Twitter handle?
Oh, yeah, I forgot social media. Yeah, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at justnascience.
Okay. And I will, again, have all of that linked down below, both if you're listening or if you're watching on YouTube. You can get those links to check out y'all's podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you. Appreciate it.
We're always looking for information, myths, misconceptions. So if you have an idea or you heard something, you saw something, let us know on social media. You can email us at justnapodcast@gmail.com. We always love getting suggestions.
I want to let you know that the links to everything we talked about today are available below. And if you want updates on the podcast and advice through graduate school, you can sign up for those updates and get my graduate school guide bundle that has a bunch of different cool guides in it. And that will be available at sciencegradschoolcoach.com/STEMS podcast, which is also going to be in the links below this video.